There's a couple things I remember really clearly when my father-in-law died. First one was being in the barn. In the dark with the lights off. During the day, though, there's enough light coming in, but it gives kind of a romanticized feel to the whole inside of the barn. And there is the combine that my father-in-law had fallen off about 6 days, 5-6 days before. Fell off the top of the combine and died. You could still see in the dust on the side of the combine the mark that his hand left as he fell down and was reaching out to try and grab on to something. I always remember that. He hung in there but died 5 days later in the hospital with all of us around him. And so the second thing that I really remember was feeling very strongly the presence of God in the room, coming into the room at one moment when my wife and I were holding my father-in-law's hands and talking to him and comforting him. I remember saying to my wife, "Don't go anywhere right now. He may leave us just right this moment." It was such a strong feeling in the room. It was amazing, like nothing else I have felt before. But here's the other thing I was feeling later that night when it was all over, watching someone take their last breath. That was my first experience with that. That was a privileged thing to be there. I know that might not sound like it if you haven't gone through that experience yet, but I was in awe of the entire experience. Not easy by any means, but really glad that I could be there with the rest of my family for him. But what I really remember later that night was, well, first of all, you come back to the deceased's household and there lies his placemat for dinner 5 days ago, his stuff on the table, his coffee in the cupboard. His stuff was out. Like, he wasn't planning on leaving. His stuff is out, but he's gone. And you walk back into the presence of him somehow for at least a little while. That was interesting. But what really struck me later that night, and this is something that's important to me personally, you may not be the same way, but it's important to know that everybody is different, and it's one of the other really important reasons why you want to make sure and make these arrangements in advance, was lying there in bed at night thinking, who's got just the idea of who's got his body? What the idea of his body being stored in a cold morgue at the hospital. People will say, well, he's dead, John, he's gone. His soul's moved on. He's not there anymore. Well, sure, that's fine. That's great for him. But, what does that do for me? I want to know that he's okay. And it's amazing how powerful that feeling becomes around the loss of a loved one that's close to you, is taking care of the body, giving yourself time to get used to the idea that, this person is gone and that you're never going to see him again. And in the midst of all of that, having to plan every last detail of a funeral, forget about it. It's impossible. That's why you end up with so much conflict. That's why people and families end up spending more money than they should, not doing enough, feeling conflicted over what to do and what not to do. Not to mention the stress. Even if everything goes reasonably well, you've got a good family, there's no dysfunction there, everybody's getting along, you've got now grief brain. And that, my friends, is a whole nother thing to deal with. And dealing with that and trying to do everything around and that surrounds the death of a loved one, it's a lot. It's too much. And it's unnecessary. You can change it right now, right here, this afternoon. Or whenever you want to schedule that appointment with your local funeral home and funeral director, go get it done. Go have the conversation. Go at least have the conversation.